Hello to all of the presidentially purposed out there. This is Jordan from presdentialpurpose.com, and you guys already know me, so let me just get started. I have been wanting to write you guys a series of blog posts for a while, but I didn't feel ready. I just didn't feel ready. I felt like I had so much to say, and I wanted to say it in all of the right ways, the perfect ways, and then of course it ends up not being said. So the good thing is that even though I haven't blogged in the past month, I have been doing things, presidential things, in fact. My first book, which was released as a PDF, when was that? Valentine's Day of this year, is now officially a book. Like, you can hold it in your hands, you can flip the pages, you can smell the pages, you can write on the pages. I can write on the pages if you want me to, with a little message. It's kind of cool. Among other things, lots of other things going on, but this isn't about that. This is about one of the essential messages that I've been wanting to share with you guys. And it's something that I've figured out when I went to DC a while back. And I went to the favorite place that I always like to go when I'm out of town, and that's the bookstore. Rummaging through the books, boom, boom, boom. Feeling kind of awkward, but not too awkward, because the books are your friends, and they're like, hey, you don't need to feel awkward in the bookstore. And so I'm walking around, and I went to the sections that made me feel comfortable. Those sections were home and garden stuff. I don't know why. It's not like I have my own home, but it just makes me feel comfortable decorating, design things. And I'm going around, and then I hit the philosophy section. Now, if any of you know me, despite the fact that I do go on endless rants and pontifications and thinking sessions, I've always been afraid of the term philosophy and the term philosopher. It's always been very intimidating to me. And it wasn't until I was talking to one of my Spanish students, who's a little bit older than I am, and I was telling her a belief that I had about something. And she said, you do know that you just basically explained the basic tenets of Buddhism. And I looked at her and I was like, no, actually I didn't. And it was at that moment that I realized that despite the fact that I have been afraid of philosophy and philosophers and whether or not I could be one or would be one or should be one, I have been practicing in thinking along those lines. Now, I'm not trying to say that I am by any means some major philosopher. That's not what I'm trying to say. The point is that I was afraid and running away from something that actually was already a part of my life. So getting back to the bookstore, I'm passing all these sections, I'm accepting the sections and liking them, and then I hit the philosophy section and I was like, no, I'm not reading any of this. Let me just, move away. And because I have committed myself to trying to figure out what it means to be presidential in my own life, and part of that, as I define it now, is stepping out of my comfort zone, or at least stepping to the edge of my comfort zone. So the voice inside of me was like, hey, maybe you need to be presidential about this. Why don't you just go ahead and take a look and see if there's anything that you like? So I'm looking at the books, and I just took a scan. It was a quick enough scan to where I could say, yes, I have acknowledged the philosophy section in this bookstore in DC. Now I may move on. But something interesting happened. I saw a book that I had purchased, and the name of the book was Babble No More. And it's all about language learning. And for those of you who don't know, I am a language coach, teach Spanish. The funny thing about Babble No More is not only that it's a really great story about how polyglots across the world learn languages, but I bought the book the last time I was in DC. So this is this whole tradition of every time I go out of town, I go to a bookstore. It makes me feel less awkward, and I also find a good book. And so this book memorializes my trip there. So I'm in the philosophy section, the section that I was rejecting, and I happen upon the book that I bought the last time. So it was strange, because the first thought that came to me was, why is a language learning book in the philosophy section? But people have philosophies about language learning. As it turns out, I have my own philosophies about language learning. So again, it was another experience realizing that I've been running away from something that's already present in my life. Why? But the language learning book was only the tip. I bent down to look at the shelf where the language learning book was. And as it turned out, right next to that book was another book about presidents and their words. And I believe the book was called Words from the White House. So of course my brain just starts to explode because I'm doing this presidential purpose stuff. So obviously everything that's related to the White House, everything that's related to both fictional and non-fictional portrayals of the concept of the presidency is interesting to me. So of course I had to pick it up. I pick it up and I said, I'm going to take this book over to the corner and I'm going to read it for a little while. So that's what I did. And one of the first things that I read was something profound about the word presidential. What they said about the word presidential was that presidential was one of many words that United States presidents and people who were connected to the presidency were responsible for inserting into our language. So take yourself back after the Revolutionary War. We are in the late 1800s, and we've gone from being a colony to now being an independent state. Well, as with people who typically invade spaces, people who are asserting their new space start to assert different elements of their culture and their language as parts of their identity. So what do we start doing? And some of you may already know this story. Via Noah Webster, we start creating our own dictionary, our own form of English as a way of asserting that we are not a colony, so much so that we don't need to speak the language of our previous rulers. And so, of course, Noah Webster starts to modify words. So all of our different spellings come from this very intentional quote unquote misspelling of British English to make it American English. Now, not only that, Noah Webster started to choose specific words to put in, and two of the specific words that he put into the American dictionary were presidential and congressional. And these were new words because the idea of a president in the sense of the leader of a nation was an affront to the fact that we just kicked the king out of our country. So people who believed in a sort of standard English based upon the British standard, the royal standard, they viewed words like presidential and congressional as words that had no status, words that were sort of classless, because they represented revolution. They represented change. So now, when you start to think about the word presidential and what it means now, of course, on this site, I'm saying that it means a lot of things that we maybe aren't even conscious of. But that gut kind of reaction to the word presidential is that you're walking into the room like a boss. You are really stepping into the forefront and saying, I not only have the ability to make change in my own life, I have the ability to make change for other people. It's a big word. It has a lot of presence. And if someone were to call you presidential, it would really be nothing but a compliment. So the word has had a journey. Presidential has not always been what it means today, as many words don't have the meaning today that they used to have beforehand. The same thing for congressional. Now, I don't think that congressional is in the same league as presidential, but congressional certainly doesn't have the same bitter taste that it had when Noah Webster first put it into the dictionary. So this book, outside of telling me about presidential and congressional, it just goes on to say that presidents and those associated with the White House have been one of the principal bodies responsible for injecting new words into our language. Now, how does this connect to presidential purpose? Well, we talked about the manifesto, the Time for Presidential Purpose Manifesto, and it elaborates this idea that we should graduate with the president, where we think of a president's term as a sort of schooling that you couldn't even buy at the highest institutions, and thus when they pass off the baton to the next president, they are thus graduating from this prestigious academy, right? And now that we've established that we want to graduate with the president, we have to understand what that means and what we would need to do in order to achieve that goal. Well, part of graduating with the president means that you would have to be presdential. And in order for you to be presdential, that means that the current dictionary definition that presidential is something that only pertains to the president has to be modified. It has to be changed. It has to be changed to a word that could be accessed by any of us at any point in time. That's not to say that without having done anything that you could be presidential, or maybe it is. I don't know. But the point is that the current definition of the word, or the current accepted definition of the word, standard definition, has to be amplified in order for us to be presidential, such that we can graduate with the president, right? So when I saw this book, Words from the White House, and I saw that the word presidential has already had a journey that many of us don't even realize it has had, then it brought a certain sense of legitimacy to my idea that we can take this word a few steps further, right? We can take it to the point where people feel like they have a presidential aspect. So I'm going to close this out. For every time you're doing something new and you're stretching boundaries and you're saying something crazy or something that feels crazy within the standards of normalcy, you have these dips where you go in and out and believing in your idea, believing that you're saying something that is worthwhile, something that is worthy of being tested in the popular sphere as to whether or not it can become a part of the fabric of our minds and our consciousness and the way we do things. And admittedly, it's sometimes difficult for me to always believe, even in the presidential purpose, because it's kind of crazy, this whole idea that some regular person like me or you or someone else could stand on a stage and graduate with a president of the United States of America. That's kind of a crazy idea. And I'm so thankful to testing my boundaries with the philosophy section in the bookstore in DC, because it allowed me to connect with this book that held this idea that presidential has a journey, that presidents are so heavily related to words, and by implication that what we're doing here is important and it has merit. All right, I'm signing off now. Thank you so much for listening to me. If you have any questions or comments, make sure to comment down below and to travel on over to presdentialpurpose.com and join the movement. See you later. Presidentially, of course. Bye.